This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a special night. We begin the fourth chapter, the fourth parak of Maseches Sukkah, Mem Beis, Amud Beis. And we are, earlier in the Masechta, we talk about Sukkah. And as you've gathered from the previous parak, now we are talking about the other central mitzvah to the holiday, which is about the Arba Minim. In the previous parak, we talked about the identification of the Arba Minim, a lot of technicalities about them. And now in this Mishnah, we're going to be talking about the timing of when we take the Arba Minim. A little bit of introduction is required because there's some details in here that are going to be a little bit jarring. Because nowadays, if you don't know, now you know, we don't shake the lulav on Shabbos on any of the days. Doesn't matter what day Shabbos falls out on, we don't shake the lulav and the esrog on Shabbos. But you are going to see in the Mishnah that this is not so straightforward. It did not always start off that way. And we're going to see also there were different stages in how the permissibility of shaking the lulav and esrog on Shabbos, depending on where it was, when it was changed. So if anything we say seems incongruent, whatever, it's not congruous with what we actually practice. It's well, this is why we learn Gemara because you see a bit of the development of the halachic process. Okay, so with that preface. Just I'm preempting someone raising their hands, but Rabbi, we don't do this. Well, there you go. So here we go. Lulav arava shisha v'shiva. So taking the lulav and the arava. Now, why do we specify the arava? Because we're referring to the hakafos that they would do with the aravos around the mizbeach. So both of these are done depending on the year, either 6 days or 7 days. Hallel v'hasimcha, the recitation of Hallel and Simcha. Now, it's a very Litvish approach to circumscribe when you're allowed to have Simcha, right? Right. This was the different, like the Misnagdim, right? The anti-Hasidim, right? So they would want to circumscribe when you're allowed to have. So what does Simcha actually mean? You look at Rashi. Rashi tells us Lechol Basar Shlamim. Simcha wasn't just like this ephemeral idea. I'm walking around with a big smile on my face. There's concrete ways to express Simcha. So it's referred to bringing the carbon shlamim. Ain't simcha b'basar v'yayin. We would, when it says that simcha is achieved through meat and wine, it's referring to the meat of the carbon that we'd be bringing on the holiday. So those would be done shmona. Those would be 8 days. Sukkah v'nisach hamayim shiva. So the sukkah nisach hamayim is 7 days. Hachalil chamisha v'shish. And hachalil would be played 5 or 6 days. So this is referring to the Simchas Beis Hashoeva. Simchas Beis Hashoeva isn't, nowadays it just means like a bunch of dudes getting together and drinking beer. I think pretty much. I mean, I'm fine with that. I just don't think you need like a religious justification to do that. That's all. But what I meant was back in the day, they would go to the Beis Hamikdash and they'd be celebrating the water libation that was being offered on Sukkot. We talked about it. It's at the beginning of Tainus, Maseches Tainus. This relevant. We just have Saint Talmud that even though we don't start saying with Saint Talmud right away, we begin to invoke God's power, His gevura over the rain, over the elements, already on Sukkot. So that's the Nisach Hamayim. That's the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. What are we drawing? The drawing of the water for the water libation that was offered then. Generally, we do wine libations. What was unique for Sukkot is that there was a water libation due to the rain. Speaking of like ancient cultic rituals, right? This definitely smacks of it, right? Okay. Moving forward. Lulav, Shiva, Ketzah. Now, let's understand, right? We just threw out like, this is 7 days, this is 6 days. So where do we get all these numbers from? Where are we pulling them from? So here we go. Lulav, Shiva, Ketzad. A lulav is 7 days. So how do you wind up with 7 days? Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Shechalios B'Shabbos Lulav Shiva. If the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, then you wind up with 7 because, again, here's the part that does not comport with what we do nowadays, they would actually take the lulav on Shabbos when it coincided with the first day of Yom Tov. Ushar kol hayamim shisha. But if Shabbos basically was on any other day, like on Chol HaMoed, the lulav would not be taken on Chol HaMoed when it coincides with Shabbos. So that's how you get 6 or 7. It's 7 days in a year that Shabbos coincides with the first day of Yom Tov. It's 6 days because if Shabbos coincides with the day of Chol Moed, it knocks out that day from taking the Arba Minim. The Gemara will explain why. Arava Shiva Ketzad. How do we wind up with only 7 days? Well, how do we wind up with 7 days of Arava? Yom Hashvi Shel Arava Shechal Yos B'Shabbos. So when the seventh day of the Arava, the final day to bring it, Hoshana Rabbah is what we call it, right? So when Hoshana Rabbah falls out on Shabbos, we'll take it even then. Sarava Shiva, Ushar Kol Yamim Shisha, but on other days it would just be 6. And toward the end of our session today, we'll explain why. Mitzvahs Lulav Ketzad. Now, okay, great. So we mentioned that they would take the lulav on Shabbos when it coincided with the first day of Yom Tov. What did this look like? How did they orchestrate this? So here we go. This is quite a testimony. Mitzvahs lulav ketzad. Yom Tov harishon shel chag shechal yos b'Shabbos. When the first day of Sukkot coincides with Shabbos, molichin es lulovehen lahar habayis. Everyone would bring up their lulavim to the Temple Mount. The chazanin mekabel mehen. Chazan here doesn't mean us, someone with an operatic voice. It means the people on staff over there, the gabayim. The gabayim there, the chazan mekabel mehen. They would take everyone's arba minim. V'sodrosan al gabe itztava. They put it on this like little stage, this big stage or something where they would store all of it. V'azakenim manichan shelhem belishka. Now, the older ones got priority treatment. They got to, the elders got to put theirs in a special chamber. But Umalabdino son, Lomar Kol Mishmegia Lulavi Liyado, Harehu Lo B'matana. And they would instruct everybody to declare that if my lulav gets mixed up, and someone takes mine and I take theirs, it should be, I'm stipulating that they can have it as a gift. That way they are the owner of it, even though it wasn't originally theirs. So they could be Yotzei Mitzvah, and if in the event I get someone else's lulav and esrog, I'll still fulfill the mitzvah as well. Okay, great. This is all on Erev Shabbos. Lamachar, Shabbos morning, first day of Yom Tov, they come into the Beis HaMikdash, mashkim in abayin. They get there bright and early. V'chazanin zorkin osan lifnehem. And the Gabayim like, here's you love him, come and take them, starts throwing them in front of them. V'heim mechatbin u'makin ishes chavero. And it's like, you ever throw bread? I remember when in Darche, where I went to school as a kid, it was right by the beach, near the beach. So you had a lot of seagulls there. So kids like, oh, here's some bread to the seagulls. All of a sudden, they were like kicking each other, fighting back and forth. It's a Mortal Kombat Seagull edition. So that's basically what was happening over there. It was like a flock of seagulls fighting over a piece of bread. People were knocking each other back and forth. What was supposed to be a huge Kiddush Hashem of everyone coming to the Beis HaMikdash to worship God, unified as one, turned into one major Chil Hashem. Kishro Basin, Shaboli di Sakana, and when Basin saw that it actually was leading to like people could be, God forbid, stampeded. Like there were people literally being injured, maybe even killed there when this was happening. Hiskinu Shei Kol Echav Echanot Bebeso. They made a new rule. You know what? When Shabbos and Yontif Harishon coincide on the same day, stay at home, do it there, don't carry it outside, and that way we preserve some Jewish lives that way. Ad Khan the Mishnah, right? Quite a scene, quite a picture of colors for us. No, okay. So there was our entertainment for the evening. The Gemara continues. The Gemara asks, "Amai tilta ba'amahu v'litchi Shabbos." So leaving the first day alone for a moment over here, if Shabbos falls out on any other day of Sukkot, then we said you're not allowed to do the Arba Minim. But I don't understand. Why should I not be able to take the Arba Minim? At worst, maybe they are muksa, but but this is like at most we would say that's just a rabbinical level of prohibition. That's just aser midrabanan. shouldn't that be superseded by the mitzvah of taking the arba minim, of taking the four species? Um, Tosfos actually compares this, I believe, to the receptacles of the lechem hapanim, which also there's a similar idea that they had to be set up ahead of time in order so that they could then the bread could then be taken care of on Shabbos. And basically, he says the ino asli kli says that it's possible that we might understand that the arba minim don't have a status of a kli, even though they can be used for a mitzvah. And even though in theory they could be used for sweeping, but they're not designated as such, it's possible that they are like rocks on the ground and they'd be muksa machmas gufa. But even if that's true, even if they're muksa, that's just rabbinically prohibited. Shouldn't that be swept to the side to fulfill the mitzvah of arba minim? So Amarabba, Gezerah Shemet Lena B'Yoda V'Yelech Eitzobaki Lil Mode. We're afraid that maybe you want to learn some nice new techniques on how to shake the lulav. The Avirenu Arba Amos B'Rishus Harabim, and you'll wind up walking 4 amos of Rishus Harabim carrying it in a public domain while it's Shabbos. Behind time of the shofar, behind time of the Megillah. This might sound familiar because this is why we don't blow a shofar on Shabbos, and this is why, remember, we learned that we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos either. Very same concern of maybe you will want to learn how to do it, and you will carry it in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, which is a Isser Deoraisa. Once we're dealing with the biblical level prohibition, then we certainly have what to be concerned for. And the rabbis actually have a certain power, Rashi points out, that while the Rabbanan cannot directly, revoke a mitzvah in the Torah per se, they can tell you not to fulfill it sheva al taseh. They can tell you to passively not fulfill a mitzvah in the Torah if it serves a higher cause. So, for instance, if Rosh Hashanah falls down on Shabbos, one of the days, they could tell you, even if it's the first day, do not blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. That's a biblical level commandment, and the rabbis are just the rabbis. Well, they have the power to tell you for if they believe that there's a big concern that maybe you'll come to violate something else in the Torah, they could tell you cost benefit analysis, better to passively not fulfill a positive mitzvah, lest you might come to violate a negative commandment in the Torah. All right, so that's all well and fine, but if this is such a huge concern, I'm afraid that I might leave my house in order to have someone train me in the art of poking people I'm just joking, with my lulav. Yihachi Yom Rishon Nami. If that's true, shouldn't we not allow the taking of the lulav on the first day of Yom Tov as well? Why then is there a distinction between when Shabbos falls out on the first day of Yom Tov versus the other days of Yom Tov? Even if it falls out on the first day of Yom Tov, we shouldn't allow you to take the lulav because it's concerned you might leave your house. Rishon hatiknula rabban bebeso. Well, the rabbis already solved that. They said, yeah, you're only supposed to take it in your house. Once they gave those explicit instructions, bebeso, literally in your home, there should no longer be concern that you will leave your home carrying it. But hatenach acher takana, come takana ma'ikla memar. But that was only later that they instituted a takana that you could only take it in your house. If you remember that the wacky story in our Mishnah, the Mishnah told us that before that takana, in principle, the rabbis were fine with people doing it in the Beis HaMikdash. So again, Hadar Kushi L'Duchta, we're back to square one over here. Why would the rabbis be okay with you risking maybe absentmindedly carrying the lulav in a Rishus Harabim on the first day of Yom Tov, but not on the other days of Yom Tov? Ela Rishon de Ise min HaTorah bigvulen lo gazruhu rabbanon hanach de lisnuhu min HaTorah bigvulen gazruhu rabbanon. The distinction is that the first day of Yom Tov is biblically mandated even outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Even outside of Eretz Yisrael, it is going to be biblically mandated. So because the first day of Yom Tov is biblically mandated, therefore, again, it's the cost-benefit analysis they're making here. They weren't going to be gozer against taking it when the Shabbos and Yom Tov are Rishon coincide with each other. The other days, like Chol HaMoed or something, well, There's no deoraisa outside the Beis Hamikdash. There's no deoraisa obligation for me to take the lulav anyway. So once we're just talking about fulfilling a dirabanan, why would I risk violating the Isser deoraisa of carrying and transferring on Shabbos just to fulfill a dirabanan? That doesn't add up. But now the Gemara asks, and this might be on your minds as well, Ihachi ha'idna nami. Wait a minute. But what about nowadays? If you look at Rashi, ha'idna nami, lidchi b'yom tov rishon es hashabbos. So the Gemara, it's interesting. Already at times of the Gemara, we're going to see later on, the Gemara will explicitly address this. They were not taking it on the first day of Yom Tov anymore. Unlike what it says in the Mishnah. At a certain point, the custom changed, practice changed, that they would not take the lulav even on the first day of Yom Tov when it coincided with Shabbos. So, but according to this logic, maybe we should be taking the lulav on Shabbos when it coincides with the first day of Yom Tov. So how do we make sense of how far we've come that we don't take it even on the first day that falls out on Shabbos? So this is a fascinating point. Anan lo yadina b'kivua diyarcha. We don't know how to calculate the moon, meaning we're concerned that maybe what we think is first day of Yom Tov is not really first day of Yom Tov, and so it's only a suffix maybe I'm fulfilling the Doraisa. For only a suffix of maybe I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog, it's not worth the risk of maybe violating Shabbos in the interim. But but for those, in Eretz Yisrael, who would be able to verify that the first day of Yom Tov Sukkot is indeed the first day of Yom Tov Sukkot with certainty, shouldn't they at least be able to take the lulav and esrog on the first day? So the Gemara says, in Hachinami, yeah, you know what? You're right. And in fact, we have a proof from a brisa. The Tani Chada Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag Shechalios B'Shabbos Kol Amolich and Tzluvin Lahar Habayis. One brisa tells us that back in the day when Yom Tov Harishon and Shabbos coincided, everyone would go up to the Beis Hamikdash, right? Kind of like what we described in our Mishnah. But Tanya Idach, but then there's another brisa that says the Beis HaKnesses. The language there is they would go to the shul. Shma Mina, when would you go to a shul? Kam bisman shebeis hamikdash kayim. The first brisa that talks about the Beis Hamikdash is when the temple stood. Kam bisman she'ein beis hamikdash kayim. But the latter brisa is saying even when there was no Beis Hamikdash anymore, and people were just going to their shuls, they still took the Arba Minim in Eretz Yisrael at least. Shma Mina. So where we're leaving off tonight, though, spoiler alert, this is not how the conclusion remains. Where we're leaving off tonight, it sounds like if you are in Eretz Yisrael and they know with certainty that Yom Tov Harishon is indeed Yom Tov Harishon, it sounds like, quote, nowadays, they should still be taking the lulav and esrog on the first day of Yom Tov, even when it coincides with Shabbos. However, that is not where the Gemara will ultimately conclude, but we're not going to get up to that tonight. But just in case, you're going to take a trip to Eretz Yisrael and you're expecting everyone on Shabbos, on the first day of Yom Tov, to be taking out the lulav and esrogim, I'm pretty sure they don't do that. But when you get there, you could, of course, consult your local Orthodox senior rabbi. That's some of you are not familiar with that one. But between Mincha Ma'ariv at Shul, whenever I finish a Dvar Halacha, that's generally my minhag, right? And so some of you might know that, right, Judd? I conclude, I say, consult your local Orthodox senior rabbi. It covers my bases. All right, a few points. One is, if you look at Tosfos, this is Tosfos, the third one on the page. Lo yadina b'kivia diyarcha. So Tosfos addresses this point. What do you mean we don't know how to calculate when the first day of Yom Tov is? So right, remember, we're all saying, well, nowadays we know when the first day of Yom Tov is. We have the internet, we have WhatsApp groups, we know already. So already back then they had to reckon with this question. La mishum delo yadinan. It's not that we don't actually know when the first day of Yom Tov is. Da'amrina b'reish beitza. This was actually addressed in Maseches Beitza, Dalet Amud Beis. Deha idna yadinan. In truth, nowadays, even in Talmudic times, they knew outside of Eretz Yisrael when the proper date was. Ela avad rabbanon ke'ilu lo yadinan, but the rabbis want us to practice as if we did not know with certainty. Why? Mishum gezerah the Hassam, the Zimnan de Gazruk Zera Va'asil Kalkule, because there were times, apparently historically, where the governments would come in, there would be pogroms, they would tear up the Jewish calendars, and we would lose track of everything. So even though at certain times in history we were blessed to have more peace and tranquility for the Jews, every now and then, who knows, maybe it happens. There were times where we would just be running from the Cossacks or whoever was chasing us in the day, and we would not be able to properly calculate things. And so, because of concern for that, they said we should operate in general like we don't know the proper date, even though there were many times in Jewish history that we did know the proper date with certainty. So, you get that question all the time about second day Yom Tov. This is kind of the thinking behind that. Um, One other point before we conclude that I want to share. This is in the Dibros Moshe. So if you remember in the Mishnah, we talked about Hoshana Rabbah. We talked about how if Shabbos coincides with Hoshana Rabbah, they would still do Hoshanas. So just a quote from the Dibros Moshe. Mitzvah shi mehalacha lo mistaber shabalacha yes din aseh lidchos los aseh. But the thing is, this ritual doesn't seem to be significant enough that it should supersede a losase of doing this on Shabbos. Sha'arava yom hashvi b'Shabbos, and now which we find that the Arava, when the Shana Rabbah coincides with Shabbos, seems to supersede Shabbos, even though the Arava is not, the Hoshana Rabbah ritual is not biblically mandated. Humishum deleka iser malacha b'mitzvah Arava to rak tiltal ba'alma. This comes back to the point originally we saw in Tosfos, we saw in the beginning of the Gemara, that the Arava at worst is muksa, right? It's like rocks on the ground. Muksa machmas gufa. It doesn't have a purpose at worst. Muksa, pretty much everyone agrees, it seems to be from the Gemara, is midrabanan. So maybe for the midrabanan, it would be able to supersede. It's not superseding the Oraisa level of Shabbos. The Hoshanis is just superseding the Muksa concern on Shabbos. And he doesn't seem to reckon with this, at least from the passage I see here. But generally, we say Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, that a lot of pretty much almost all the rabbinic safeguards and stringencies and strictures or whatever you want to call them were waived inside the Beis HaMikdash, where there was more of a general awareness and conscientiousness when it came to maintaining the intricacies of halacha. So I'm not sure why the muksa wouldn't just be superseded on that basis. I don't have clarity on that point, but I thought I would raise it. Anyway, my friends, this brings us to almost the middle of Mem Gimel Amid Aleph, and Mir Hashem, we will pick up with that next week. So, wishing you all a good Shabbos. Rabbi Cohen's away. I will be seeing you all the minyanim and practicing my Art Scroll Stone Chumash page announcements. So I'll see you there, God willing. All right, take care, everybody. Have a good night. Good Shabbos.